Good afternoon, and welcome to AIADA's AutoTalk. I'm your host, Rachel Soleimani. Before we get started, a few quick reminders. Anyone that is registered for today's program will be receiving a copy by the end of this week. And if you have any questions, feel free to enter them into the lower right side of your interface under the Q&A bar. Today, we're excited to welcome back our good friends and used car experts, Bob Grill, Carfax Senior Partner Development Manager at Carfax, Mike Rossman, automotive consultant and past VP of Sales at AutoNation. And we're also adding a new face to this session, Chris Frey, Senior Industry Insights Manager at Cox Automotive. You guys have a great program for us today. I've seen this deck. It is awesome. So, Chris, I'm going to let you start us off and take it away.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm glad to be here today in my first used car super session. Let's get started. Welcome to spring, everyone. We have another quarter in the books, and it's definitely one that featured dynamics we were not expecting back in January. The auto market had a first quarter that was quite slow compared to history. It started with record COVID cases from Omicron, winter weather impacting January sales, and then in February, the invasion of Ukraine set in motion a new series of energy and commodity shocks, and we've experienced another round of random unfortunate events, like the Felicity Ace cargo ship fire and sinking, Canadian trucker strikes, an earthquake in Japan that set back progress on supply chains and auto production there, and more recently, we can add some secondary inspections at the Mexico-Texas border causing day-plus delays in supply chain timing. We are clearly facing much uncertainty for the year, including what new variants of COVID may bring, and how long and how bad conflict in Ukraine may get. As we always do, we will try to share our latest thinking on what is likely to happen in the auto market and to used vehicle values. So let's get started with a macro update before diving into the auction pool. The COVID front in the U.S. is mainly a positive story. 7-day average of new cases has remained below 50,000. It was at 38,000 last week. That level of cases is down about 90% from where we were back in early January and is close to levels last seen in mid-July last summer. Thankfully, because of progress in vaccinations and a declining virulence of the virus, we saw less of an impact from that Omicron wave, and the U.S. has likely transitioned from pandemic to endemic status on COVID. That doesn't mean we can forget about it. Health experts suggest that with COVID as endemic, we could see 400,000 deaths per year from the virus, which would make it similar to the worst common flu outbreaks each year. However, we will hopefully no longer see the disruption we've experienced over the last 2 years. But with other regions of the world remaining in some pandemic state, and a key worry for the U.S. or the auto market in general is that COVID remains disruptive to supply chains, especially in areas like China that have not had vaccination success. We believe that supply chains will be hampered continually and that new vehicle sales will be postponed and a recovery in wholesale at best a calendar year 2025. The U.S. is enjoying recovery in economic activity. We back the normal index from Moody's Analytics and CNN Business ended down 6% from February 29th of 2020, but it slipped about 0.8% late last week. 11 states now have higher activity than they did in February 2020. We believe we're likely to get above 100 sometime this quarter. One factor that's been especially significant on weaker performance for used sales this quarter has been slow start in tax season. Through April 8th, 54% of projected refunds for the year had been issued, when in 2019, 83% had been dispersed by the same week. From historical analysis of used sales and the relationship to tax refunds and traditional spring bounce in wholesale used values, the market needs to see critical mass, which is about half of tax refunds having been issued. Based on the IRS data, we finally reached that point. However, used demand is still 3 to 4 weeks behind schedule in 2022, and this has hugely impacted seasonal adjustment factors. Fortunately, the average refund is up 14% versus 2019, and it's up 10% year over year, to the highest refund recorded at this stage of tax refund season. We think April is going to be the best month for used sales in 2022. Yes, there are growing headwinds that may reduce demand from what may have hypothetically occurred without them, but as history has shown, when cash is flowing into consumer accounts, retail used sales will increase. Before we leave this slide, I'll address the most common question we get about tax refund season. Many questions we get on our analysis of the delay on tax refunds come from comparing this year's refunds to last year's. As we pointed out, the average refund is up 10% year over year in the latest data. By volume, tax refunds this year are ahead of last year's even slower performance. But we would argue that last year's tax refund season was almost irrelevant to the used car market. By the time refunds started to flow in 2021, more than $4 trillion worth of stimulus had been issued. So last year's $365 billion tax refund season was a little over 9% of all that stimulus. This year, no stimulus. The tax refunds are the only game in town. So that brings me to our lackluster estimates for used vehicle sales so far this year. Chart here shows weekly retail estimates compared to the same week in 2019, which is the line that's solid across at 0%. The sales estimates come from our same-store analysis from DealerTrack, which has been a strong predictor of retail sales as evidenced by registrations once we get them all in 60 days after the fact. We can see with these estimates that the peak frenzy period last year was in weeks 13 to 21. But even prior to those peak weeks in the spring, many weeks in Q1 last year saw used and new outperform 2019. That hasn't been the case this year. And this year we're seeing diverging trends in new and used when comparing performance to 2019. New has gotten worse from a seasonal perspective, which is what a comparison to 2019 would reveal, and that's exactly what the new SARs have indicated. Erosion in strength as production failed to improve upon delivery to keep pace with the fact that January is usually the lightest month of the year, and each progressive month in the quarter delivers larger gains in volume. Total new light vehicle SAR has delivered 15, 14.1, and 13.3 in sequential months in Q1 this year. The used market has also failed to deliver the sequential volume gains that the market typically sees in February and March. Looking at estimates for the full month of March, volumes improved by February by 37% for used retail, but that fell short of normal seasonal increases. So used was actually down 15% year over year. The supply situation in new and used is quite a contrast for Q1, but both feature tightening in March. New inventory ended down in March 71% compared with 2019 days supply, which is down similarly 61% and down 1 day of supply from the end of February. Even though the volume increases are not what we typically see for the time of year, with supply so tight, it doesn't take much of an uptick in sales to see day supply tighten again. And with the latest rounds of production and supply chain issues in Asia and Europe, it looks like new will get worse before it gets better. Looking to the right, used supply started the year in a much better place. Dealers built inventory in January. It was actually up year over year in February and still is. And with slower sales, day supply was not only up year over year, but higher than each of the last 3 years up until now. And like with new, even though the increases in sales in March have not lived up to the normal seasonal growth pattern, we're seeing day supply tighten rapidly. Our auto data indicate that used inventory at the end of March was down 9% compared to 2019, with used day supply up 5%. But day supply was down 9 full days from the end of February. So we've quickly gone from higher than normal supply to normal supply for this time of year as we get into the heart of this year's tax refund buying season. Looking at this view, we'll shift from a macro perspective to commercial vehicle supply trends at auction. Supplies of used vehicles sold by commercial sellers continues to be well below historical norms despite a modest increase in the volume of repos arriving at auction. While we expect repossession volume to continue to follow a long, slow recovery path, absent a significant economic downturn, we do not expect any of the major sources of commercial supply to return to normal this year. Off-lease equity remains high, preventing those vehicles flowing to auction. And while rental supply has improved at Manheim since this time last year, it is still below historical norms. After we consider the lack of inventory at auction, we'll now turn to pricing trends at auction. This is our Manheim Used Vehicle Value Index. Wholesale used vehicle prices on a mix, mileage, and seasonally adjusted basis decreased 3.3% month over month in March. This brought our value in March to 223.5. While a 25% increase from a year ago, it was on a non-seasonally adjusted basis down 0.6% compared to February. It's still up. It's still significant. Strain of supply is making vehicle values remain high. On this slide, you see the year-over-year price performance of seasonally adjusted series has begun to retreat from the latest peak in December. As we move into the next several weeks, prices are likely to move up with the spring selling season, but the magnitude of those increases are likely to be lower than what we experienced over 2021 because of those massive price increases last year. After the spring market fades, it's likely that the year-over-year increases turn into declines through the end of the year. Again, the persistence of high prices is unlikely to make any declines as extreme as the increases that we saw in 2021. Focusing on this slide, the graph shows the Manheim Index March year-over-year percent change for top vehicle segments. While all the segments have continued to see strong gains year-over-year, vans maintain the largest gains, followed by compact cars and then midsize cars. Pickups have swung from being the strongest gaining segment in the first part of the pandemic to the weakest now. Here we're showing MMR index trends broken down into vehicle age groups. These prices are 2022 by week, and each age cohort is tied back to week 1 at the beginning of this year. The prices behind the index value trends shown, again, are anchored to week 1. The near new segment, or 1 to 4-year-old, are shown in solid lines, while the 5-year-old and older are shown in these dotted lines. As we can see on the chart, the oldest vehicles held their value better in Q1 than near new segments. It's not surprising to see larger price corrections in the near new age groups, given that those segments posted the highest total gains in 2021. Next, we're showing the 2022 three-year-old index trends across some of the key vehicle segments to watch for potential demand shifts and corresponding price impacts associated with acceleration of gas prices in early March. Prices for sedans, as well as entry and midsize SUVs, started to rise in the wake of the gas price shift in mid-March. However, it is difficult and potentially misleading to attribute the price shift solely to the acceleration in gas prices, since prices in these smaller vehicle segments tend to rise at this time of year with or without gas prices going up. While large pickups and full-size SUVs consume more fuel, it is again the more affordable units sold in the spring market that see the bounce at auction. Here's a view of weekly average prices for model year 2019 vehicles this year compared to last year's extraordinary price increases for both wholesale and retail. We ended 2021 with model year 2018 wholesale prices up 42.6% for the year. Retail ended up the year 24.8%. This year actually started with 10 weeks of wholesale declines. Retail has seen 12 straight weeks of declines after starting flat. The average retail price declined 0.2% last week after declining 0.3% the prior week, and the retail declines are slowing. And as we've seen, wholesale prices increasing in 3 or 4 of the last several weeks. Wholesale prices are starting to show the spring bounce at auction. For my last slide, we'll say forecasting continues to be very challenging, to say the least. This quarter felt like playing black swan bingo, and uncertainty lingers for the economy and for new vehicle production given the war in Ukraine and new supply chain woes. We started the year with expectations that new vehicle production and supply would gradually improve and be realized in the back half of the year. We now think improvement will at best come at the end of the year. With more challenges, we've reduced our forecast for new vehicle sales from our first quarter results in total for retail and for fleet, which we see across the top. We have also substantially revised our expectations for leasing, which has big implications for the wholesale market through 24 and into 2025. So this slide has our updated forecast. The downward revisions mentioned to our new sales means we're now expecting hardly any growth, and the growth that we will see is likely to show up in the fourth quarter. And as I just shared, we have lowered our expectations for lease penetration to represent a decline year over year. We've also made a downward revision in CPO sales as we expect so much competition in nearly new vehicles, including from rental car companies, that like last year, CPO will struggle with setting a new record. We slightly reduced forecasts for the used market, and while the supply challenges in new will support demand for used, even with a slowing economy and tighter credit conditions, which are expected, Q1 used sales were below expectations, leading to our downward revision for the rest of the year. We had already expected that the market would struggle to see any improvement in volumes compared to what was achieved in 2021, especially because of the record volumes in the spring of 2021. That said, the spring should be the strongest quarter of the year in 2022, and as mentioned earlier, April will likely be the best month. We're also sticking to our year-end forecast for the Manheim Index to see a 3% decline year over year for December. That also implies a net 3% decline for the year. We have seen greater than 5% declines through March in history, but the seasonally adjusted index should see recovery of much of that decline in the second half of April and into May. Then modest declines for much of the back half of the year can still deliver the original target for December to leave the Manheim Index down 3% year over year. In a few weeks, we'll finally know what the spring increase will look like, but what we know from the weekly trends is that spring bounce is definitely underway. With resurgent supply challenges, we stand by the belief the supply scenario does not support a major price correction. We also don't expect a collapse in demand in 2022, as that would require a recession, and that's not what we've been forecasting. That concludes my portion, and I'll turn it over to Mike and Bob to continue on. Appreciate your time.
Thank you for that, Chris. That's very insightful, and certainly we appreciate all you bring to the conversation. It's a lot. So thank you to you and your team for being able to put that in digestible bites, and we appreciate everything you do. Thanks, Chris. Wanted to just take a minute and let my good friend and colleague for many, many years, Mike Rossman, give you a quick hello.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you once again this spring, and we're excited about the prospects of what's ahead of us.
Yeah, it's been interesting. Everyone enjoys spring. We'll finally get some of this winter weather out. I know some people on the call today are experiencing some of that still. I always appreciate working with Mike, and we always appreciate working with Dan and their team. So thank you very much for this. We're looking forward to it. So we'll go ahead and get going. When we take a look at everything that's possible, it's amazing how many times it'll just come down to core basics, right? And so we wanted to start the presentation out by looking at what can we control at our dealership. You know, so much of the economy and so much of the downward pressures and COVID and everything come into our business, certainly, but there's still some things that we at the dealers have the ability to control. And we won't wear you out on this. I know we've talked about this in the past, but we just wanted to lay a foundation and give you a little refresher on that. You know, when you look at the controllables at a dealership, certainly trade-ins come into play. We know there's a lot of pressure on getting trade-ins with the new car supply being the way it is, and dealers really struggling to have inventory. But certainly when you have an opportunity for a trade-in, that's 100% in your control. That's literally 100% controlled by you as to how much you feel that trade is worth, how aggressive you want to be on that trade-in, whether you keep it for retail, whether you keep it for wholesale. Certainly that trade-in is 100% in your control. Second is your service department for the franchise dealers. When we look at it and we look at our service department, that is by far our best source from our best customer, right? It's our loyal customer to our dealership. It's the consumer that buys from us and services with us. And certainly the inventory coming out of our service department is the best possible inventory out there for our used car department. So again, how we market our service department, how we manage our service department, how we cultivate our cars out of our service department is 100% in our control. The third item are those lease returns, right? Those lease returns absolutely make the best certified pre-owned product, right? Have always been a strong part of the sales segment. And you as a dealership are 100% in control with what you feel you should do with those lease returns. You know, over the last year and a half, most dealers have gone to a we keep them all, which is really the way to go. You know, that's 100% your control though. So again, just a quick refresher on the controllables, and without question, trade, service, and lease returns are that baby. We wanted to take a minute and talk about the situation for dealers today. You know, depending on who you're talking to, there's some commonalities. There's also a little bit of difference. But one thing that dealers are finding is that no such thing as average at the moment. And whenever we just strictly go by average, you know, we cost ourselves a lot of money. We can cause undue aging. And so we wanted to take a minute and do a little deeper dive at the true cost of just average market pricing everything, right? We know no two used vehicles are the same. They're certainly unique in itself. But in order to hit an average price index, in order to put all of your vehicles and make sure you're pricing them to the average market, you have to lower the higher end product and you have to indeed raise the lower end product. So when you look at the higher valued vehicles, what are those, right? What are the vehicles that have to be lowered to be maintain average, right? Average pricing. Well, you take a look at your personal loan lease returns, you take a look at your one owner vehicles, you look at your well-maintained vehicles, you look at your accident-free vehicles. These type of vehicles are lowered to achieve average when you should typically be asking more for those vehicles. The market will give you more. Consumers know and understand the value of those characteristics, and you should be asking more for those vehicles. Lower valued vehicles are some of the rental units, the fleet vehicles, multiple owner vehicles, along with accident vehicles, right? These typically need to be raised to obtain average pricing when you should typically be paying less for those vehicles. So there's no such thing as just throwing everything in a bucket just based on year, make, model, and miles. Those are absolutely key indicators. Those are absolutely things we need to pay attention to as to what's in the marketplace. But you need to be able to identify those that should bring more versus those that you should be paying less for. This really comes into play when you're looking at trade-in opportunities, right? When you're looking at the off chances that you have the ability to get a trade. Now, remember, 70% of the customers coming into the dealership today have a vehicle to dispose of, right? They have a vehicle to dispose of, whether they trade it, sell it, or give it away. 7 out of 10 of your customers have another vehicle. And these vehicles typically have the higher value traits to them. You know, they're cars that have been taken care of. They're typically your one owner vehicles. They're personally owned vehicles. So again, absolutely know your market, absolutely know the average in your market, absolutely know the penetration in your market. All those are important. With that being said, become great at identifying your opportunities and become better at identifying the pitfall capabilities. Okay? No two are the same. So always be careful, be able to ask it when you can ask it, and be able to identify it without paying too much. There are history elements that increase the value, and there are history elements that decrease the value, right? One owner, no accidents, low miles, service records certainly increased. Damage, accidents, bad titles, open recalls, absolutely reduce value. And again, just pay attention a little bit to the details. There's lots of opportunity out there. We don't want to just fall into running too fast and just shotgunning everything. Mike, I know you had a little bit of input on this one. What would you say to the audience on this one?
Well, as we know, every vehicle is unique. There's no question about that. But more importantly, I think you've got to focus on your game plan. So what is your game plan? As you look at these vehicles, and I'm sure a lot of you look at these items as time goes and you're pulling up service histories and so forth on the vehicles. But in the store, there are certain things that allow you to gain these one owner, no accident, low mileage service history cars. And part of that is knowing what's going on in your service department. As we know, typically we have more traffic in our service department than we do in the showroom. So knowing what's coming in the door and knowing what you need for your inventory purposes, you really need to be checking your DMS daily. That should be part of your game plan to see what cars you may be able to glean from your service department. And as you know, those cars coming out of there, you have the service history. You've been the dealership in most cases that has done all the service work to those. So they're worth more to the buyer. And that's why the service history ends up on, the left side of this slide. The other thing that you really have to look at as part of your game plan is how are you handling your appraisal process? Are you doing an active trade appraisal with a customer? Not just having a salesman run out and get information and bring it back to a used car manager and discuss the vehicle, but are you involving them in the process? That really helps you determine when and how the customer can and will trade that vehicle in. The other thing that I see that is a positive that you could do as far as a game plan would be to be sure that you're going back and reviewing your appraisals daily with your sales management team, rather than just have one person be involved in that appraisal. We should have everybody taking a look. We need inventory, so let's figure out ways that we can glean more inventory out of what we're seeing every day. So do you have some benchmarks that you set up for yourself or your team? Like book to look. How many cars am I booking on the number of cars I'm looking at? What's a good number to look for there? Am I estimating my recon properly? How does that recon estimate look to what we actually end up spending in our service department? Now is the time to stick to a process or a game plan. It's kind of easy not to stay focused right now. I know that from what I'm hearing that the profits are quite high, and it's kind of easy to fall into bad habits when you're making a lot of money. So now is the time to have that solid game plan, that process, and get on it and stay on it right now.
Exactly right.
Those things are certainly important.
That's exactly right. We wanted to go in a little deeper and show you what we're talking about, how easy it is to fall into a trap. You're looking on the screen right now at a 2018 Chevrolet Camaro RS convertible with 39,000 miles on it. Subject to change, as we know, low volatility in the marketplace. But here we have an average of 31,520 for an MMR on that vehicle, right? 31,520. That's for the entire run of a 2018 Chevrolet Camaro RS with 39,000 miles. That's a year, make, model, miles comparison, right? But when you go a little deeper into it, right? When you go a little deeper into it, you realize that the first batch of those cars, well, those were the vehicles that maybe weren't as desirable. Those were the vehicles that maybe had the accidents, maybe weren't the right equipment, maybe were multiple owners. Well, you're certainly not going to pay average for less than an average vehicle, right? And the vehicles on the other end of the slide, those are your one owners. Those are your accident frees. Those are the right colors. Those are the options that you're looking for. Well, everyone on this call understands you can't steal those vehicles, right? You can't steal those vehicles. So the true average market is not just the middle, right? You could have as much as a $5,000 swing based on those unique vehicle assets. Just again, a deep dive looking at the wholesale side of our business. No such thing as a perfect middle when it comes to the particular vehicle you're looking at, right? So again, go a little deeper than just your year, make, model comparisons.
Well, that's one of the reasons I mentioned earlier that we should review those appraisals as a team to see if we can find some reasons maybe to pay more for that car and be able to trade for that real nice one. Or if we've hit one a little heavy, that, we make sure that we're understanding what we've done with that appraisal. So I think that discussion is certainly an important one.
100%. Mike, you mentioned the service department, And, I mentioned it earlier, you've mentioned it now. Here's the thing, without question, the best inventory there is comes out of our service department, right? That's that homegrown vehicle. Homegrown vehicle is the fastest selling, most profitable vehicles there are. If we sold that car new, right? We sold it as a new car. We've done all the service and maintenance history on that vehicle. It gets traded into us, or we get the lease return given to us, and we do the reconditioning at our dealership. And now it's for sale as a used car. So we've had that vehicle for the entire lifetime of that vehicle. If you're going to step up, that's what you step up on. That is premier, fastest selling, most profitable inventory there is. Would you agree with that, Mike?
Absolutely.
Right? If you're putting a deal together, that's the one you step up on. Okay? Now, when you're talking retail, everything that we're talking about leads to retail, right? We're in the retail business, not the wholesale business. The same thing applies to the retail side of the equation, right? To the retail side of the equation. 2018 Chevy Camaro, let's look at it, 39,000 miles on it, right? Again, average market retail, take a look at it. In any given marketplace, a manufactured certified frontline vehicle is the highest revenue target in the area. On the other end of the scale is that branded title, right? Is that bad title? Well, those are easy to understand. I got a certified frontline vehicle versus a bad title vehicle. But here's the part we don't always grab hold of. Here's the part we don't always pay enough attention to detail. Every element is cause and effect on the retail value of a vehicle. Every element is cause and effect on the wholesale value of the vehicle. So again, put in your trade process, put in your pricing processes, pay attention to the details. To Mike's point, when things are good, when we're making a lot of money, we tend to go a little faster, make hay while the sun's shining. The faster we go, the more subject we are to making a mistake. It's really that simple. Catch your breath, take your time, stay on offense. Now is not the time to be on defense, but have your plays in place, execute, and pay attention. Anything to add to that, Mike?
Yeah, I think the main thing for me is if you don't have a solid game plan, better get one now and stick with it. That's vitally important. And the other thing to remember, and I know this is somewhat difficult right now with the way production is on new cars and evaluating trades that may come in a month, 2 months, 3 months from now. It's a little hard to value those cars. But the one thing that we have to keep in mind is with the loss of all the new car production that we've had, it's going to keep these values higher. So if you're going to stay on that side of the ledger, you certainly want to do that with the cars that are coming that you know, the ones that you've serviced, maintained, one owners. I don't think you can make a mistake. And if I were going to miss it, I'd miss it on the high side. Certainly, I wouldn't try to miss it on the low side. So you can hang in there, and I think you'll be safe with those cars because I really don't see the values are going to go down all that much. If you looked at the slides earlier with what Chris was saying, he's looking at a total of 3% for the entire year on a year over year. So I wouldn't be afraid of those cars. Now, some of the other cars with issues, I'd be a little more cautious there. But if it's a great car, I'd throw caution to the wind, and I think you'll end up winning in the long run that way.
Absolutely. Well, let's take a look at a retail conversation, right? It's all about retail. How do we maximize our retail in today's situation? How do we make it happen? When you're thinking retail, when you're putting your cars out on space, when you're looking at advertising them, when you're putting them online, when you're putting them on your website, when you're putting them on the multiple websites, the goal here is to make your car stand out. become the red car. That's the whole point of marketing your car. Remember, even in today's economy, even in today's retail environment, when you put your car out there, you're competing against, depending on the mileage you figure your marketplace is, thousands and thousands of other vehicles, even in today's restricted market. You need to be able to make your vehicle stand out. Make it the red car. Make it the obvious choice for the consumer trying to find that car. How do you do that? Step 1, step 2, step 3. Stop VIN populating. Number one complaint by consumers today is that they cannot tell the difference when they look at vehicles online. Everything's pretty online. Everything's pretty online. But when you think about it, if you're going with a VIN populated listing and you're putting in windows and power locks and tilt and cruise and air conditioning and every vehicle made today has power windows, power locks, tilt, cruise, air conditioning, MP3, Bluetooth. Stop VIN populating. Make your vehicle the red car. Make it stand out. Now, here's an interesting study from Cox Automotive, right? Chris was on earlier. 54 to 56% of your first point of contact with a consumer is at your front door. At your front door. It's not an email. It's not a phone call. It's not a chat. And if it is, 90% of that conversation is just asking if the vehicle is available. Think about that for a second. Your first point of contact is actually at the front door. So what's that mean? It means that you may not get the opportunity to talk to that customer about the difference in your vehicle because they may have seen it online, you blended in with the background of all the other vehicles, and they never showed up. They never called. They never sent an email. They never sent a text because we know over half of them, over half of your first point of contact with that consumer is at the front door. So how you list that vehicle matters. Stop VIN populating. Let us show you what we're talking about. Okay? Here's a vehicle with a minor damage, right? Minor damage, got a lot of good things to it, got a lot of good service history. It's a personal use vehicle, right? In fact, it's a personal lease vehicle, right? With 14 service records. Does it have some minor damage? Absolutely. Here's the thing though. Consumers do not anticipate used cars being perfect. As a matter of fact, when you describe them as perfect, they get a little nervous. Now, they want to know what it looked like before you fixed it up. But again, make that car stand out. So what would it look like if we did a listing on this car, right? What does the VIN populated look like versus what should we do? So in the top is a VIN populated, right? A VIN populated. Even if we add some cool little taglines to it, it's still a VIN populated, right? Again, engine, 4-cylinder, 2.0 liter, front wheel drive. That's true of all those Civic LXs, right? Again, they're describing just general cars. Great opportunity for a standard bearer of efficiency, utility, longevity. The Civic LX is a combination of form and function. These are not new cars we're selling, folks. We're selling used cars. You need to make them stand out. Take your time, spend your time where you're making money. And where you're making money is a good quality listing that makes your vehicle stand out with a good, solid description, right? If you're going to ask for more money than average, you need to explain why the car is worth more money. If you're going to ask for the money, you need to explain why. So here's that same exact vehicle just made available. This beautiful personal leased, well-maintained one owner, 2019 Honda Civic. We leased this Civic to its original owner. Our Honda certified mechanics have taken care of the Civic its whole life. We know this car better than anyone. The owner received some minor cosmetic damage. 1 year into the lease, had it professionally repaired and kept it for the remainder of the lease. Don't miss out on this well-maintained 2019 Civic, priced with Carfax history-based value. Again, make that car stand out. Give that car some personality. Give the consumer a reason to be interested in it. All cars today have been populated that does you literally no good. We know it's quick, we know it's convenient, we know, but spend time where you're making money. Mike, you want to wrap this one up for us and we'll hand it back over to Rach?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, game plan is the important part. How are we going to handle these things, and who's going to do them, and when are they going to do them? So I would just pose that question to you. What's your game plan, and are you going to be able to stick to it and make it work for you? So that's the big thing that we have to do going forward is we know what processes look like, but can we stick to them and execute them like we should? We appreciate your time today, and good luck to all of you. I hope you have a great spring and a great year.
Thanks, Mike. Rach, from us here, we appreciate the opportunity. To everyone on the call, thanks for spending a little time with us today. Go ahead and take it away, Rach.
Bob, Mike, Chris, thanks for joining us today and giving us a sneak peek into the current used car market. Bob and Mike, thank you once again for coming on to your yearly program, our used car guys, as we call you. We just really appreciate it, and we appreciate you guys. Again, you will all be receiving a copy of this webinar by the end of this week. To those on the line, join us back here on Thursday, May 5th at 2 p.m. Eastern as Google shares the latest online market trends. So be on the lookout for promotions on how to register. For more information about AIADA, visit AIADA.org. Thanks for tuning in and have a great day, everyone.